Welcome to Fraud Friday. I'm Bob Coleman. Today I want to talk about the largest bank fraud in Nebraska state history, $45 million. Jesse Hill, 35, of Hickman, Nebraska, was sentenced to 5 years in federal prison in a scheme that defrauded nearly 20 banks of tens of millions of dollars. Now, when I say a $45 million fraud, that is the number of loans he attempted to get. The losses were only $20 million. In imposing sentence, U.S. District Judge Susan Basie said the conduct was deliberated and calculated. This particular offense would not have been possible without you. He had a partner. She told Hill from the bench that his actions were the exact polar opposite of the reputation he had built as a family man and a church leader. Christian faith was very big in this fraud and enhanced his reputation among these local banks in Nebraska. And as I said, there was a wide variety of banks. Let me read some of them off to you. Lincoln Federal Savings and Loan, Nebraska Bank of Commerce, Home Federal Savings of Grand Island, Western National Bank, First State Bank of Ralston, Nebraska, United Republic Bank out of Elkhorn, Nebraska, I3 Bank of Bennington, Nebraska, Mid-States Bank of Council Bluffs, Iowa. All of those received loans in about the $2 to $3 million range. The fraud was extensive. His charismatic personality convinced bankers that he and his partner were legitimate business people. Hill read a written statement to the court saying, "I'll be working the rest of my life to repair my reputation and make restitution. I didn't have the courage to challenge what was happening as the losses grew." The fraud began in 2020 and extended through 2022. The central mechanism was the fabrication of investment account statements. Hill operated a company and he acted as the financial advisor to Lincoln businessman Aaron Marshbanks. Together, they represented to bankers that Marshbanks controlled an investment account of about $6 to $7 million in securities, and that would be used as collateral for the loan. So these loans, while they were used for real estate, were cash secured loans by the collateral. The two would prepare fraudulent financial statements to banks. He would accompany Marshbanks to meetings where he vouched for their legitimacy. The statement listed assets held by Piedmont Fund Services. The firm later confirmed it had no knowledge of these false statements. Banks relied on these documents to approve credit lines. Mid-States Banks Buff lent $2 million, and along with those others on that list. On March 9th, 2022, Marshbanks and Hill executed control agreements. That's the agreement between the bank and the investment advisory saying, hey, the bank has control of these funds. They're set aside as collateral for our loan. Banks extended loans based on those fraudulent accounts that did not exist. Court filings showed that losses actually exceeded $30 million, wiping out annual earnings of some of these community banks and reducing staff bonuses, raises, and employees. And this is the issue of the fraud. I firmly believe white-collar fraud is not a victimless crime. There are actual victims. In this particular case, the banks were the victim, and it impacted the employees of those financial institutions. The scheme collapsed in November 22 when his partner, Aaron Marshbanks, committed suicide. The Lancaster County attorney listed the manner of death as undetermined, citing a combination of fentanyl, pentobarbital, and other drugs. Aaron had not been charged or indicted, but obviously the emotional and psychological damage that he incurred led to the tragic outcome. Jesse Hill positioned himself as a member of the community, an upstanding Christian man. He served as the board member of Country Bible Church, where he taught Sunday school, was active in faith programs. Sentencing documents reference numerous support letters. I read them. There were 130 pages worth of character letters who described him as a husband, father of 3 young girls, a church member, and an upstanding member of the leader of the church. And it's interesting reading these letters, character that he portrayed to his community, as the judge said, was completely opposite of his actions. And that is a sad commentary on how the mental health issues that affect individuals who think differently than you and I on how they want to portray themselves, and then they have to take actions to support this persona that they've created. Under his plea agreement, Hill admitted to 1 count of conspiracy to commit bank fraud. He agreed to forfeit a $900,000 villa in Puerto Rico, a share in a multi-million-dollar aircraft, funds held in his own investment account. I like this line. It is unclear whether Hill will retain ownership of his $1.2 million home near Hickman. And I would imagine in Hickman, Nebraska, that is a very substantial house. Marshbanks operated a network of limited liability companies, and he also got in on the act. He named most of his companies with religious-bearing names after Bible verses such as 1 Chronicles 29:11. These appeared legitimate to reinforce his visibility and his character within the Lincoln community. He was a high school basketball star at Lincoln Christian High School. He was 6'6", and of course he was active serving on the school board as the treasurer and overseeing a number of charitable and faith-based works, including staffing a charity vegetable stand and participating in anti-human trafficking efforts abroad. His faith identity permeated his business dealings. Filings show frequent use of biblical references in his community statements. People described him as personable, ambitious, and devout, a combination that helped him secure credibility with the local bankers and community. He maintained a long-term association with a company called Duck Medic out of Lincoln. He had sold that. It was a duck cleaning business. He sold that in 2010, but he continued to list that as his business address. The prosecutor said this was the intent of the crime, to build up a persona that he was a legitimate businessman and that he was using this formal business address to pull off what prosecutors said was a pretty sophisticated crime. Following Marshbank's death and Hill's guilty plea, the court-appointed receiver began identifying and liquidating assets. What they can recover, who knows? The damage was extensive. The banks lost more than money. This is the quote from the judge. They lost trust, stability, years of work. The consequences of these decisions are long-term, ... to Nebraska, to the communities. The fraud unraveled only after Marshbank's death, triggered review of the pledged accounts, and then it all quickly unraveled. What the fraud was is that the $6 to $7 million that was supposedly held in the investment account by Hill, who created these statements, that fund was used over and over and over to pledge to the banks. Clearly, there are warning signs. One is why there were so many banks involved. Bankers ignored that obvious red flag in terms of why do we have the privilege of doing business with this person when he's dealing with all these other banks. It's a sad case. A lot of people got hurt. Thank you for joining me today for Fraud Friday.